In a small village, there lived an old farmer named Thomas. He had worked on his land since he was a young boy. The fields, the soil, and the animals were his life. But times had changed. The rains had stopped coming as they used to. The crops had failed, and the farmer had fallen into debt. The bank in town was run by men who did not care about farmers. They only cared about money. Whenever Thomas went there to ask for help, the men would laugh at him. "Old man, you have nothing left to give us," they mocked. Over the years, Thomas had pledged his land, his tools, and even most of his animals. All that remained with him now was his last horse, a strong and loyal creature that had been with him for years. This horse was more than just an animal. It was Thomas's friend, his helper in the fields, and his companion in his darkest days. Many nights when Thomas sat outside his small hut, he would pat the horse gently and whisper, "At least I still have you." But the bank did not care about friendship or loyalty. One morning, their men arrived at his door. They told him, "You must sell your last horse. You owe us money, and we will take whatever you have left." Thomas felt a sharp pain in his chest. He begged them, "Please, not the horse. It is all I have." But the men only sneered. "Either you sell it, or we will take it away by force." With tears in his eyes, Thomas walked his horse toward the market. Each step felt heavy, as if he was carrying the weight of the world. He knew he had no choice. His heart broke at the thought of losing the last thing that gave him hope. Thomas led his horse slowly down the dusty road toward the market. The sun was hot, and his back ached, but nothing hurt him more than the thought of parting with his loyal companion. The horse walked beside him calmly, as if it understood what was happening. Every now and then, Thomas wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his shirt. He tried to be strong, but his heart was breaking. At the edge of the town, a black car stopped near the road. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man dressed simply, wearing a cap and dark glasses. It was none other than Keanu Reeves. He had come quietly to the countryside, away from the noise of the city, just to enjoy some peace. Keanu loved to travel without attention, meeting simple people and understanding their lives. As Keanu walked toward the market, he noticed Thomas and his horse. Something about the old man's face caught his eye. It was filled with sadness, yet there was also kindness and dignity. Keanu paused and asked softly, "Sir, you seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Thomas stopped, unsure of who this man was. He sighed deeply and replied, "No, sir. Everything is not all right. I am walking to the market to sell my last horse. The bank has taken everything from me. This horse is my only friend, but they will not leave me alone unless I sell it." Keanu listened carefully. He looked at the horse, then back at the old man. His heart ached at the thought of someone losing such a loyal friend just because of greedy men. Keanu placed his hand gently on the horse's mane. "It seems this horse means a lot to you," he said. Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, it has worked with me for years. It carried me when I was weak. It is the last piece of my life's hard work. Without it, I feel like I have nothing left." Keanu stood silently for a moment. Inside, he already knew he could not let this story end in sadness. Something told him he had to help this man and his faithful horse. The wheels of fate had begun to turn. The road to the market was long and dusty. Thomas walked slowly, his head bent low, while the horse followed quietly at his side. The animal seemed to sense its master's sadness. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if Thomas's heart was tied to the horse's reins. When he finally reached the village square, people were busy shouting prices, selling vegetables and trading goods. But Thomas did not see the noise or hear the calls. All he could think about was the painful moment when he would have to let go of his last friend. At the same time, a stranger had arrived in the village. He wore a plain shirt, a cap, and dark glasses. No one knew him, but his face carried a calm kindness. The man was Keanu Reeves, though the villagers had no idea. He was traveling quietly, looking for peace away from the busy city. As Keanu walked, his eyes caught sight of Thomas and the tired horse. Something about the old farmer's face stopped him. It was lined with years of hard work, but today it was filled with deep sorrow. Keanu stepped closer and asked gently, "Sir, are you all right?" Thomas looked up, surprised by the stranger's voice. He shook his head slowly. "No, I am not. The bank has taken almost everything I owned. Today I am forced to sell my last horse. This animal is my life, my helper, my friend. Without it, I have nothing." Keanu listened carefully, his heart growing heavy. He patted the horse's neck and saw how lovingly it leaned toward the old man. He could feel the bond between them, a bond that greedy men could never understand. For a moment, Keanu stood silently. Then he said softly, "Sometimes life tests us in the hardest ways, but no one should lose their friend because of cruelty." His words were simple, but they carried hope. Thomas sighed deeply, not knowing who this stranger really was. He simply nodded and said, "I only wish someone cared about people like us." Keanu looked at him with calm eyes. In his mind, he had already decided he was going to change this man's story. Thomas tied his horse near the market stand. His hands shook as he patted the animal's neck one last time. The horse looked at him with gentle eyes as if asking, "Why are you leaving me?" Tears filled the farmer's eyes, but he wiped them quickly. He did not want the people around to see his pain. A few villagers noticed him. Some whispered, "That poor old man, he has nothing left. Even his horse must go." Others only laughed, saying, "That's what happens when you cannot pay your loans." Their words cut Thomas's heart, but he stayed silent. He knew no one would help him. Just then, the bank officers walked into the market. They wore fine clothes, shiny shoes, and cruel smiles. One of them shouted loudly, "Thomas, did you bring the horse? This will be ours today. Finally, you will have nothing left." The men laughed, treating his suffering like a joke. Thomas bowed his head. He felt weaker than ever before. He thought to himself, "Maybe this is the end. Maybe life has nothing more for me." But standing in the crowd, Keanu Reeves was watching everything. He saw the farmer's pain, the villagers' whispers, and the cruelty of the bankmen. His heart burned with anger. He could not let this continue. Keanu stepped forward calmly and said, "How much is this horse?" The market fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the stranger. The bank officers smirked. "Who are you to ask? This horse belongs to us now." Keanu's voice was steady. "No. This horse belongs with the man who raised it, worked with it, and loved it. But if money is what you want, then name your price." The officer laughed, thinking this stranger was foolish. "Fine," he said. "Give us more than what this poor man owes, and the horse is yours." Without a moment of hesitation, Keanu pulled out his wallet. He handed the men a thick bundle of cash. The officers' eyes widened. They grabbed the money greedily, not realizing what was about to happen next. Keanu turned to Thomas, smiled softly, and held out the reins. "This is your horse," he said, "and it will always stay with you." Thomas could not believe what had just happened. His old rough hands trembled as Keanu placed the reins back into them. For a moment, the farmer was silent. Then tears rolled down his wrinkled face. "But why would you do this for me? You don't even know me," he whispered. Keanu smiled, gently. "Because no man should lose the friend who has carried his life's burdens. This horse belongs with you, not in the hands of greedy men. His words were calm, yet powerful. The villagers, who had been watching closely, began to murmur. "Who is this stranger? Why is he helping Thomas?" some asked. Others felt ashamed that they had only whispered about Thomas's misery but had never stepped forward to help him. The bank officers, however, were not happy. They clutched the money tightly but sneered at Keanu. "You think buying this horse changes anything?" one of them said sharply. "This old man still owes us more than he can ever repay. Today it is the horse. Tomorrow it will be his hut. We will take everything." Keanu's calm eyes turned firm. He stepped closer and said in a steady voice, "No, you will not take everything. You cannot crush the soul of a man who has given his whole life to working honestly. People like him feed families, feed towns, feed the future, and people like you destroy it." The crowd grew quiet. Some nodded in agreement, whispering, "He is right. Why should the banks rob the poor?" Thomas looked at Keanu with both gratitude and fear. "They are powerful," he said softly. "No one dares to speak against them." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on the farmer's shoulder. "Then it is time someone dares, because when we stay silent, injustice grows stronger." The words touched the hearts of the villagers. For the first time, they looked at the bankman not with fear, but with anger. And for the first time in years, Thomas felt that maybe, just maybe, he was not alone in his fight. The spark of change had been lit. The villagers stood in silence after Keanu's words. No one had ever spoken so boldly against the bank officers. The men in fine clothes looked around nervously, not used to being challenged in public. Thomas held the reins of his horse tightly, afraid that the officers might snatch it away again. But Keanu stood beside him like a shield. He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Look around you. How many of you have suffered the same way as this farmer? How many have given your land, your animals, or your homes to these banks only to be left with nothing?" The crowd grew restless. One woman stepped forward and said, "They took my goats last year when I could not pay." An old man added, "They took my land and sold it for triple the price." Another shouted, "They have stolen from all of us." The villagers' voices grew louder, and soon the square was filled with cries of anger and pain. For years they had been silent, too afraid to speak. But now, with this stranger standing strong, they felt courage rising in their hearts. The bank officers tried to shout over the noise. "Quiet! Quiet, all of you! This man is misleading you. He is an outsider. He knows nothing about this village." But Keanu shook his head. "I don't need to be from this village to see the truth. I see hard-working people being crushed by greed. I see families robbed of their dignity. And I will not stay silent." He turned back to Thomas. "This fight is not just about one horse. It is about fairness, about justice. No poor farmer should be ridiculed for being poor. It is the banks that should be ashamed." The villagers cheered. For the first time in many years, hope lit their eyes. The officers, sensing the crowd's anger, stepped back uneasily. They no longer looked so powerful. Thomas stood taller beside Keanu. His horse neighed loudly, as if joining the call for justice. A storm of change was beginning to rise in the little village. The market square buzzed with voices. For the first time, the villagers were not whispering in fear, but speaking out loudly. They were no longer just poor farmers and workers. They were a united crowd. Keanu looked at them and raised his hand for silence. "My friends," he said, "these men have grown rich by stealing your sweat and your hard work. Alone, each of you was weak, but together you are strong. If you stand side by side, no bank can crush you." The villagers cheered in agreement. Men, women, and even children stepped closer, forming a circle around Thomas and his horse. Their faces were filled with anger, but also with hope. The bank officers tried to push through the crowd, but people blocked their way. Enough! Shouted one villager. You will not take another family's land. Another added, You have stolen too much already. Thomas could hardly believe what he was seeing. For years, he had felt alone, carrying his burdens quietly. Now he saw his neighbors standing with him. Tears filled his eyes again, but this time they were tears of pride. One officer sneered, Do you think shouting will change anything? We have the law on our side. Keanu's eyes turned sharp. The law is meant to protect people, not rob them. If your law supports cruelty, then it is not justice. It is theft. His voice rang across the square, strong and unshaken. The villagers clapped and cheered again. The officers, seeing the crowd growing angrier, stepped back nervously. Their confident smiles had vanished. Keanu then spoke directly to the people. You must not stay silent anymore. Stand together, demand fair treatment, and protect each other. Today you stood up for Thomas. Tomorrow, stand up for every farmer, every family, and every child in this village. The villagers nodded. A spark of courage had lit inside them, and it was spreading fast. Thomas placed his hand on Keanu's arm. I don't know who you are, sir, he said softly, but today you have given me back more than a horse. You have given me hope. Keanu smiled. Hope is the first step to freedom. The crowd in the market had grown larger. Farmers from nearby fields and women carrying baskets stopped to listen. Everyone's eyes were on Keanu and Thomas. The bank officers, who once looked powerful, now stood small in the middle of the circle of villagers. Keanu spoke firmly. For too long, these men have used fear to control you. They take your land, your animals, your homes, and leave you with nothing. But look around. There are more of you than them. When you stand together, you are stronger than any bank. The villagers began to nod and whisper to one another. One man stepped forward saying, Last month they forced me to sell my field for a price so low it was like stealing. Another added, They trick us with papers we don't understand, then laugh when we lose everything. The villagers' anger was now clear, their voices rising together. The lead officer, red-faced, shouted, Be quiet! If you go against us, you will be punished. The law is ours. Keanu's eyes blazed. The law does not belong to greedy men. The law belongs to the people. And if you continue to cheat them, then the people will rise against you. You may have power today, but you cannot silence the truth forever. The villagers cheered loudly. Their voices echoed through the market square. Some of them began to chant, Justice! Justice! Others shouted, No more stealing from the poor! The officers, seeing the strength of the crowd, grew frightened. They backed away slowly, their pride shrinking with every step. For the first time, the villagers saw fear in the eyes of those who had tormented them for years. Thomas stood tall beside Keanu, his horse at his side. His voice shook, but he spoke clearly. You took everything from me, but today you will take nothing more. We are not afraid of you anymore. The villagers clapped and shouted in agreement. Hope had turned into courage, and courage was turning into action. The fight for justice had truly begun. The market square shook with the sound of the villagers' voices. For years they had lived in silence, but now their words were strong like thunder. Men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer afraid. Even the children shouted, Justice for the farmers! Keanu lifted his hand, and the crowd grew quiet. He spoke clearly, his voice steady and full of courage. Today you have shown that fear cannot rule forever. These men may hold papers, money, and power, but you hold something greater: unity. Together you can protect one another. Together you can demand fairness. Thomas, still holding the reins of his horse, looked around at his neighbors. He saw faces that had once turned away from him now shining with bravery. I thought I was alone, he said, his voice cracking. But I see now we are all suffering. The same pain. No more silence. We must stand together. The villagers clapped and cheered. One young man shouted, "From this day, no farmer will face the banks alone. If they come for one, they face us all." The crowd roared in agreement. The bank officers, pale with fear, tried to speak. "You are making a mistake. The law will punish you," one of them warned, but Keanu stepped forward. "No, the law will hear your crimes. You cannot hide behind papers and lies forever. These people have witnesses, they have voices, and now they have courage. If you dare to harm them, again the world will know your cruelty." His eyes were sharp, his words like steel. The villagers cheered louder, their chants filling the air. "No more stealing, no more fear." The officers, seeing the power of the crowd, turned and hurried out of the square. Their heads were low, their pride broken. Thomas stroked his horse gently, tears in his eyes once more. But this time, they were tears of joy. "You saved me," he whispered to Keanu. Keanu smiled softly. "No, Thomas. You all saved each other. I only reminded you of the strength you already had." The village had changed forever that day. The next morning, the village felt different. The sun rose over the fields, shining on faces filled with hope instead of fear. For the first time in many years, the people felt free. They gathered in the square again, not to sell or trade, but to talk about their future. Thomas stood proudly beside his horse. His neighbors greeted him warmly, clapping him on the back. "Thomas, you gave us courage," one man said. Another added, "Your struggle showed us the truth. We were all living under the same chains." Keanu stood quietly at the edge, listening with a gentle smile. He did not want praise. He only wanted to see the people believe in themselves. When the crowd noticed him, they cheered and thanked him. But Keanu raised his hand and spoke humbly. "Do not thank me. The power was always in your hearts. I only reminded you of it. Promise me one thing. Never forget what happened today. Stand together, protect each other, and never let greed steal your dignity again." The villagers nodded firmly. They promised to form a group to defend the farmers, to share food when crops failed, and to speak with one voice if the bank ever threatened them again. Hope had turned into action, and action was turning into change. Thomas walked over to Keanu, with tears in his eyes. "You returned my horse, but more than that, you returned my dignity? How can I ever repay you?" Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to repay me. Just keep living with kindness. Care for your land, care for your people, and care for each other. That is the greatest repayment of all." The horse neighed loudly, as if it too understood the joy of this moment. The villagers laughed, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. That day became a turning point for the entire village. The poor were no longer voiceless. They had found their strength, and they would never bow so easily again. And though Keanu would soon leave the village quietly, his message would live on forever. As the sun began to set, the village was filled with laughter and warmth. Children ran through the square, playing freely. The farmers talked about planting seeds again with hope in their hearts. The air that once carried fear now carried strength. Keanu walked quietly toward the edge of the village. He did not seek thanks or praise. His heart was content, knowing that the people had found their courage. But Thomas saw him leaving and hurried after him, leading the horse by his side. "Please stay with us," Thomas said. "We owe you so much. You gave us back our voice, our unity, our hope." Keanu smiled gently, his eyes calm. "Thomas, you do not owe me anything. You and your people had the power all along. You only needed to believe in yourselves. Now you are free to write your own future." The old farmer's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. He bowed his head. I will never forget what you have done for us." Keanu placed a hand on the horse's neck and then on Thomas's shoulder. "Take care of each other, protect the weak, stand for justice, and never let kindness fade from your hearts. That is how real change lives on." With that, he turned and walked down the dusty road. His steps were quiet, but his presence left behind an echo of courage that would never be forgotten. The villagers watched him go until he disappeared into the horizon. Then they turned back to their fields, their families, and their lives, this time with pride and unity. From that day, the story of the farmer and his last horse spread far and wide. People spoke not only of the cruel bankers, but of the stranger who came and reminded a village of its strength. The lesson was clear. True wealth is not in gold or land, but in humanity, justice, and compassion. Even one act of kindness can change the lives of many. And so the farmer kept his last horse, not just as an animal, but as a symbol of hope. The village would never be the same again.